a researcher created a program that examined people's tweets on Twitter. He examined 2.4 million users and 500 million tweets. And what he was looking at was, when do people tweet about certain things? And what day of the week, what time of the day? And what he found was, amongst many different things, was that people tweet more about Jesus on Sunday by any other day by a very large margin. On Sunday, people are Jesus, 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 but then the rest of the week, Jesus is absent from their from their Twitter line. And that's interesting. It kind of points to something that we're all very aware of, the concept of the Sunday Christian. Someone who is a Christian on Sundays goes to church, will sing the songs, say the right things, fellowship with Christians, and then not talk to another Christian until next Sunday. Not open in their Bible until next Sunday. Not think about God and how to live as a Christian in their culture until next Sunday. This is an issue. For as Christians, we are called to be followers of Jesus every day, not just on Sunday, but then what does that actually practically look like? What needs to change? What does this point to? And that's what we'll be looking at today. In this series that we're starting, Christianity and Culture, today will be a general overview where we look at the extreme responses of the church historically to this, both one way and the other, and then we look at how we can start mediating the grey in the middle, and look at some principles that will help us to do so. Then next week we will be looking at what it means to be a Christian in work. The next week, Christian in entertainment, and the final week, a Christian and a steward of the money that God has given us. So that's kind of where we're heading, big picture, in this series. But as we first start, we need to first ask the question, well, what is culture? Leslie Newbegins defines culture as the sum total ways of living developed by a group of human beings and handed on from generation to generation. He adds, one must also include in culture a set of beliefs, experiences and practices that seek to grasp and express the ultimate nature of things, that which gives shape and meaning to life, that which claims final loyalty. Religion is thus a part of culture. Now, that was written a while ago, but it still remains true. But then, one of the interesting things in our culture is that we are rapidly evolving at a faster and faster rate. Things become part of our culture and out of our culture really quickly. And we can just look at the fads of our culture. The amount of time between a fad becoming extremely popular and then disappearing into relevance is shortening and shortening. For example, fads like fidget spinners, flipping bottles and dabbing, that was 2018, yet it feels like so long ago. And though my kids are still trying to bring back those fads in my house. And if you look at subgenres of pop music, for example, on Wikipedia, you'll find that new subgenres include art pop, sunshine pop, and hypnagogic pop. I don't even know how to say that word, let alone what it sounds like. But each of these subgenres have a small group of dedicated followers. Culture is difficult. Culture is everywhere, and it is evolving quicker and quicker. And culture is a part of who we are as humans. We create culture because we are bearers of the image of God, the creative creator. However, because of original sin, that which we create, the culture which we create, is most often sinful. And so then we, being a Christian in a culture that is sinful, we struggle to navigate what that looks like, what we can accept and what we should reject, and how to be a Christian in it. To say that we shouldn't, as Christians, engage in culture at all is like telling a fish not to swim in water. Culture is the world we swim in. It's part of us. So how do we navigate it as Christians? Well, when we first start looking at this, we need to look at the extremes historically of the church. And now these have intellectual, highfalutin names called syncretism and separatism, or sectarianism. But they're probably easier to label as all in or all out. Syncretism is all in, that is becoming in sync with the world, and separatism or sectarianism, all out, is becoming outside of the world. Well, let's look at syncretism first. The idea here is that the Christian goes into culture completely, often abandoning or diluting the gospel in the name of relevance. That is, the Christian becomes indistinguishable in the culture from the culture. They do everything that the world does. They watch what the world watches. They spend their money and time like the world spends their money and time. They live like the world. There is no difference between them and the world. Theological liberals in the early 20th century did this by pandering to the high culture of academic modernity. And as a result, they abandoned principles like that the Bible doesn't err, the supernatural, and the divine nature of Christ. Now, most recently, this has been seen and through some parts of the emergent church, where they have also gotten rid of some of the real basics of the Bible, like, again, inerrancy of the Scripture, the exclusivity of Jesus. One example of this is Rob Bell, a Christian pastor, and I use that term loosely, wrote a book called Love Wins. In this book, he did many things, but one of them was argue that there is no hell. Then Francis Chen and Preston Sprinkle wrote a dismissal of his dismissal in the book Erasing Hell. But this is a current issue that we are facing. Do we become like the world in every aspect? And some churches have gone down that way, where they no longer hold to the claims of Scripture because they're trying to reach it, but then they lose what they're trying to reach it for. And that happens in Australia as well. So we know that's not right though, because God has called us to be different, aliens and strangers, so we don't want to go syncretism, we don't want to go all in. Well, the other option here is all out, and then this extreme isn't much better. Well, the idea here is, and it's often suggested by fundamentalists who impose man-made rules in the name of achieving holiness by avoiding sinners and hiding out in Christian ghettos or communes or subcultures. Think like Amish people, or a monastery, or a cult. This is the small community in Footloose where dancing was banned from the area's youth. One blogger noted on this, this kind of pastor is the one who can only speak of Bill Gaither Trio and Highway to Heaven. They were Christian shows a long time ago. Some of you will remember them. Now that's showing the pastor's age, but that's the idea. To go all out means I'm not going to embrace the world or engage with the world in any way. I'm just going to do the Christian thing. And what this looks like for us is that we shun popular media. We only listen to Christian music. We only we only read books published by Zondervan that we bought at Coorong. And we only watch movies that have Kirk Cameron in them, or possibly Stephen Baldwin. As a result, though, we raise obstacles between us and the world that we are trying to reach. I'll give you an example of this. My parents are amazing, and they're strong Christians, and they have attempted their best in every decision to raise me and my brothers as Christians. And they struggled with these really difficult questions about what they should let us watch as children. And as a Christian, as a child, I was raised as a Christian child in the sense that I was very much part of the Christian subculture. We would listen to, the music we would listen to is Don Francisco and Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith. That was my musical influences. Dad owned some Beatle albums, but we never used to listen to them. Most people growing up, they might be influenced by Bob the Builder or Dora the Explorer. I had Salty the Singing Songbook. Some of you know what this is. It was literally a songbook that would sing. And he was blue. I was actually in a play of this as a child. I look back now and go, what was I thinking? But then it was really cool to be part of singing Salty the Singing Hymn Book. And then the offshoot of that was Colby the Singing Robot, and then the Spindles books. Like, I was very much of that subculture of Christianity. And I guess the best example of this, though, was in high school, in year 8. So I was at a Christian school, and the roll call teacher wanted to encourage us to bring a song into class. And then the goal is we would listen to the song, and then we would dissect the lyrics. And so my friends, they brought in Metallica and New Kids on the Block, which was big back then. I brought in Stephen Wiley. Yeah, that silence, that's telling. No one actually knows about Stephen Wiley unless you were a Christian into hip-hop in the late 80s. And that's because he only had one main song, and that was this, Rapping for Jesus. Rapping for Jesus to the beat, to the beat. If you're in the church, you would have actually heard the song. We had it playing as people were coming in, and it is so 80s. Like, you can almost see the denim jacket on this guy. Now, my goal in bringing this song to my classroom, my heart was in the right place. Yeah, I was trying to reach my friends for Jesus. I was trying to bring the best of my Christian culture and then take it to my friends, and maybe that they would become a Christian because they heard Stephen Wiley's awesome song, Rapping for Jesus. That did not happen, unsurprisingly. My heart was in the right place, but my method was off. And I have a friend who was there on that fateful day who still pays me out for that decision all these years later. It actually came up last night. I was trying to do the right thing. But because I was part of a Christian culture, I struggled to reach out to the culture of the world that I was trying to reach. Stephen Wiley is not the language of people who listen to Metallica or the Beastie Boys. And I hadn't quite worked that out. See, when we do this, when we go all out, when we go into our little Christian ghettos, when we only input Christian things, when we only partake in Christian groups, we really struggle to reach those who do not know Jesus because we don't speak their language, we don't know what they know, we don't drink their water as such. We have our own little experience, and it's so different to theirs, we create obstacles between us and them. And it makes reaching them so much more difficult. I knew a Christian man who was a strong Christian, really strong Christian, had been Christian his whole life, involved in ministry, all the rest of it, but he really struggled to hold a conversation with non-Christians because he didn't know anything that they knew about. He knew a little bit about the news, but he didn't know about their culture, he didn't know about sports, he didn't know about entertainment, he couldn't talk to them in the water cooler, and it made it so much more difficult. And all-in mentality affects us when we're trying to reach people for the gospel. Okay, so then we know we don't want to be just like them, indistinguishable from the culture, but we also don't want to be completely outside of them, separate from them. So then, what do we do with this middle ground? How do we, as Christians, mediate the grey? Well, I think the first thing is that we must accept and acknowledge is that this is not our home. Pop culture is rampant with the idea of the alien. And this was very big in 80s TV sitcoms. Perfect Strangers with Balky Bartokomous and the Dance of Joy, as he from a foreign country came to New York and struggled to figure it out with a friend. If you can go to the next slide, please. Family Matters with Steve Urkel. Did I Do That? The Literal Alien Alf from Melmac, who ate cats. Mork and Mindy, where Mork in the first episode wanted to dress like a human, so he wore a suit, but he didn't know how to wear it properly, so he wore it backwards. All of these pop culture TV's things were all about an alien, whether literal or cultural, coming to a different context and trying to mediate the world around them. But it continues into today. For example, Two Broke Girls, where a rich person loses all their money and must work as a waitress. Sheldon Cooper, as an intellectual academic trying to live in a world and have a romantic relationship, if you can call it that. Eleven from Stranger Things, The Good Doctor, Harry Potter. In Downton Abbey, Tom Branson goes from a servant to aristocracy. All of these are examples of the alien. One who is not like the world around them. We are the alien. We must first own that we are different to the world around us. That we are not like them. And so trying to be just like them is not an answer for us because we just aren't. We see this in 1 Peter 2, 9-12, our verse for today. But you, this is referring to those who are saved, are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you, as aliens and strangers in the world, to abstain from sinful desires, which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. Why are we called to do things different? Because we are different. If you're a follower of Jesus, you are different to the people around you. If you acknowledge and embrace Christ, by definition, you are different. Own that difference. There is a children's book called Elma. It's one of the favourites in our household. We have the toy, or a toy very much like it. The story of Elma is a multicoloured elephant. And all his other friends are not multicoloured, they're just grey. But Elma is the life of the party. He brings... What was that? He brings happiness and frivolity and laughter wherever he goes. And he's funny and he brings all this blessing to all those around him. But everyone else is great. And Elma doesn't want to be different anymore. He wants to be just like everybody else. So Elma goes to outside of the village where they were, and he finds a berry bush, and he uses the berries to make himself grey. So he looks just like everyone else. And then he comes back to the herd of elephants, and the rest of the herd of the elephants are serious, and they're bored, and they're somber, and they're sad. And Elma is going, why is this? Why is everyone stiff and serious? And he tries to be like them, and he tries to be stiff and serious, but Elma is Elma, and he can't. And so he's out of nowhere, he yells a big boo, and scares all the elephants. And then it rains, and it wipes off the greyness, and everyone sees that Elma is Elma, and he goes, you're that guy. And they laugh, and everything's happy again. And the moral of the story is that Elma needs to own that he is different. That if he can own that difference, he brings life and happiness and is such a benefit and a blessing to the people around him if he just owns that he is different. We are Elma. We need to own that we are different to the world around us for us to bring the benefit and the blessing of Christ to them. Trying to be just like them, like Elma attempted in painting him grey. Why is that happening? It's not a solution. Okay. This idea, this concept, was a reality of the Jewish exiles in Babylon, and we saw that in the video beforehand. And this comes up in Jeremiah 29, verse 5 to 9. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, that is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. God here is saying to the exiles, the Jewish exiles in Babylon, be mindful of civic duties. Live as a part of that culture, but do not forget who you are. Refuse assimilation. Reject despair. Remain true to God. And then the stories of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are all examples of this very thing. Of people... Sorry, I'll just let... Cool. They're examples of this very thing. Of people, followers of God, navigating a foreign culture and still trying to honour God in doing so. See, those guys, they ate the food... they dressed in the clothes, they took the roles, but they never denied Christ. They never denied God. They were followers of Yahweh first, Babylonians second. We are different, and we need to own that. But then, okay, so we know that we need to be different. Aliens and strangers own that who we are in Christ. But then the next step is, how do we do mission in a different culture? A better question, how do we use our culture for the mission? So Acts 17, Paul in Acts 17 is finding a space within the culture to proclaim the gospel. He walks the streets of the city. He examines idols. He reads poetry. He knows the culture of his audience. And then he unashamedly exploits it for the sake of the gospel. Paul, in his sermon in Acts 17, opens his sermon with the phrase, "Men of Athens." In doing so, he's using a phrase from one of the city's greatest philosophers, Plato, in his famous work, Apology. He then creatively quotes Amenites, one of their famous poets, from 600 BC. Then he cites Erasmus from 300 BC. He does so in the Areopagus, which was Athens' highest court of appeal. Not a synagogue, it was a public sphere in the cultural context. Paul goes to their place, not expecting them to come to him. Then he uses their language. He doesn't talk about propitiation, atonement, sanctification, at least not in those terms. He doesn't use Christianese jargon. He uses the terms that they will understand, the language that they will understand. He quotes the culture that they are aware of in creating links and bridges to get them to know about Jesus. Paul uses the culture, knows about the culture, is aware of the culture, and then uses that as a way of talking about Christ. That is a key part of how we too then are to use our culture. How we are to be in our culture, using it for Jesus. He says this in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 19 to 22. "Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some." Being all things to all people. Well, what does that look like then for us? I want to give you an example. Liz spent some time in a Middle Eastern country. She lived there for a year. And then she wore a hijab. She wore their clothes. She learnt their language. She ate their food, went to their hangouts. In order to reach them, she became like one of them. Liz didn't come into the main street of this Middle Eastern city and then just speak English and expect them to understand it. She didn't do so in a crop top. She didn't do so with a whole heap of Vegemite that she was encouraging them to eat because the only food that one should eat. No, she didn't do any of that. She let go of her culture and embraced theirs in order to reach them for Jesus. When Liz and I were first dating and as we got married, Liz, as she grew up, she never was into sports. Her family wasn't into sports. Her dad never watched it, never played it. And so she really didn't know the rules of the sports. And then when we first got married, I spent time teaching Liz the rules of sports, particularly rugby league and cricket. And she then used that to reach out for her friends. So she had some work colleagues. They invited her to football. We studied, she learned the rules, then we were able to go to that football game. She was able to enjoy it, she was able to use the references, she was able to know what's going on because she learned that culture. Now, Liz didn't have a particular interest in football, she still doesn't. She still can't make it through an entire game of State of Origin without falling asleep. But the goal is that her intent is to use the culture for Jesus. And that is what she did. And that is also what we can do. For as Christians, we are basically missionaries in a local culture. We need to learn their culture, to speak their language, to create bridges that they may one day hear about Christ. We don't watch The Masked Singer for its sparkling commentary and brilliant musical escapades. We watch The Masked Singer in order that we might have discussional artillery around the water cooler, that we may be able to build bridges, create common bonds, that they may one day hear about Christ. See Hamilton. Eat smashed avocados, do trivia, attend events, surf the web, see what they're seeing, read what they're reading, so that you may create bonds, create relationships, create bridges, that they might know about Jesus. I'm a youth leader, and I know far more than any man my age should know about bands like One Direction, though I know they're both split up now, I'm very aware of this, or Skrillex, or Fortnite. Now, I know about these things not because I have an interest in any of them. I'm not a fan of dubstep in any way, but I know about them because my kids that I want to build a relationship with know about them. I want to have a relationship with them, so I learn their culture, so that I can use it to teach them and train them in Christ. Speak their language. Use their references. And often, as a Christian in the West, we are doing cross-cultural ministry. If you're not living in the area that you grew up in, you are doing cross-cultural ministry. I went to Gordon. I was a pastor there as a youth pastor for a time. And I was very aware of this because the culture in the North Shore is very different to the culture in the Shire, which is where I grew up. I did grade 2 organ. That doesn't hold up in the North Shore area where they all have E-Mus and L-Mus and A-Mus, and I didn't even know what that was in piano until I went over there. I got there, I needed to know I didn't start learning piano because I was never going to catch up, but I needed to know what it was because it was important to them. That's what we need to do in whatever ministry sphere God has placed us in, to reach out, to know our culture, know their culture, in order to reach them forward. Now that doesn't mean we have to know all culture, because the people you're trying to reach out won't know all culture. They won't know, they're probably not fans of hypnagogic pop, so you don't have to worry about that. But know their culture. If they're watching a particular show, as long as it's not incessantly sinful, then please, watch that show, be aware of it, so you can speak their language. Now when we do this though, we have to use wisdom. Discernment is still required. There are some, Bachelor in Paradise, for example, is necessarily not helpful to all. There are still limitations, there are still lines which must be drawn. But using whatever culture we can in order to reach them. Okay, so then the next principle in mediating the grey is to stay away from sin. Romans 6, 1-2. What shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? By no means. We died to sin. How can we live in it any longer? It is not wise to use Christian mission as an excuse to put yourself into temptation. There are still things that we as Christians need to say no to, that we need to reject, that we need to not be a part of, or to entertain the possibility of being a part of for the sake of mission. Particularly when it's an area of weakness for you. So for example, the alcoholic doesn't go into the pub because he knows what will happen when he does. As Christians, there will be some aspects of culture that we need to avoid because we know it won't be helpful for us, that it will lead us into sin. And a good example of this is there was a Bucks party at my previous church. I wasn't there, but a number of the guys that I was ministering to were. And the Bucks was a Christian, but he had a lot of non-Christian friends. During the night, there was a number of the non-Christian mates wanted to go to a strip club, yeah, I don't know what it is, strip club. And so, as a result, the Christians in that group said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to have a piece of that. And they were able to convince the rest of the group to go into a different area. And those guys don't just go, well, we're trying to be culturally relevant, so sure, let's go into the strip club. No, there's a line there. They said no. We can't put ourselves in an area of sin in order to reach people for God. That is not helpful. And there are different lines for different people, which we must be aware of. So there are some areas of culture that I'm not going to put myself in. I don't like supernatural movies, and some Christians do, but that's my line. Personally for me, so I won't watch it. But that's okay. Someone else, Christian, who is okay with that, then they can do that. That's all right too. Well, let's go back to the example of Liz. Liz wanted to be culturally relevant in the Middle East. So how far in does she go? Does she go to the mosque? Does she pray like a Muslim would pray? Does she say Allah Akbar as a customary greeting? which means praise be to God, that is Allah, not Yahweh. She doesn't do those things. There's a line there, and we must create those lines as well. Another principle here in mediating the grey is that of the weaker brother. Don't do something that will cause a weaker brother to sin. Don't put yourself in that area. It might be okay for you to do, but if it's not okay for them to do, don't do it around them or don't encourage them in it, because it will cause them to sin. We see this in Romans 14:19. I'll give you an example of this. I was preaching a lot at a church, a small church, and I was invited to the wedding of one of these guys. It was a church of young adults. And I was good friends with the pastor, and I was aware that this church had an issue amongst its young adults of alcohol, that they would drink too much. And I went to this wedding, and it's completely fine for me to have a beer at a wedding. I did. I had a beer at Negan's wedding. Negan and Joey, I had a beer at that wedding. That's completely fine. But at that particular wedding, I chose not to have a beer because I believed that it could cause those young adults to sin, to drink more. Oh, look, Michael, the pastor's having a beer. I can have a couple more, it's all good. I didn't want to do that. So for the sake of the weaker brother, I had no beer that night. And that's something that we also need to be aware of as well. As we mediate this culture, as we mediate the grey, we need to be aware that we don't lead others into sin. It might be okay for us, but if it's not okay for them, then we pull the pin on it. Alright, so some of these principles that we've been talking about is acknowledging that we are different and being okay with that. For our difference is a blessing to those around us. Then we seek to stay away from sin. We seek to use their culture for the gospel as opportunities for evangelism, and we are very aware of the weaker brother. Last thing I want to talk about then. Now this came from Mark Driscoll, but a number of other Christian pastors have talked about this as well. And that is, when we see culture, we have three options as Christian. We reject, we receive, or we redeem. There are some aspects of culture, as I've been talking about, that we must reject. That is sinful for any Christian to be involved with. We must not be a part of it and not say that it's okay or encourage that in any way. We reject the culture. Other parts of culture we receive. God is a creative God, and people use their creativity that God has given them to create art and music and beautiful, brilliant things. We receive the parts of culture that are like that. We receive it and are benefited and blessed by it. So we reject some, we receive some, and then we redeem some. We use that culture to push to Christ. We use that culture to create bonds, to create relationships. We use that culture as reference points to teach something about the gospel of Jesus. So if you are part of this church, or you've seen a couple of my sermons in any way, you will know that I talk a lot about pop culture. Footloose comes up in every third sermon. And this is because I'm attempting to use cultural references to create in order to teach the gospel, in order to teach the Bible. I'm trying to use culture for God's benefit, and in that way, I'm redeeming the culture, or at least seeking to do so. So, what area of all of this then particularly points out to you? What do you need to rethink, or maybe think a little bit deeper or pray about how you navigate your culture in relation to Christ? For we are different. We are called to be different. What does that look like for you? Please, will you join with me in prayer? Lord, this is a tricky subject, and it's so part of everything that we do as Christians. I pray, Lord, that you will give us insight, wisdom, and discernment in how to mediate the grey, how to navigate the cultural complexities of being a Christian in a non-Christian world. Help us to own that we are different, Lord. Help us to use the culture to point to you. Help us to avoid sin and draw lines and avoid areas that cause us to sin. Allow us, Lord, to be loving to the weaker brother, to abstain from certain things as a result of them, even though we are free to do so. Lord, give us wisdom and discernment of how to live a Christian and how to be a Christian in this culture. And I pray, Lord, for all those who are listening, that you would bless them in this area this week. In your name,